Welcome. This will be my video on the 1988 video game Gain Ground, released originally for the Sega Genesis or Sega Mega Drive. I'm playing it emulated. I'm going to start with a spoiler-free review, and we'll see by the end of it if I feel like doing a thoughts section with spoilers or not. But I'm not going to spoil anything about this or anything else without giving verbal warning first. Now, the game I'm thinking is probably rated E for everyone, because there's not really anything, that it's not like violent or something. And I really love this game. So I played this through the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis, what's it called, collection or some, I'll get the exact name real quick. If my computer is awake at all, I will. And the there we go. Yeah, Sega Mega Drive and Genesis Classics is what it is called, which is currently not available for purchase. At least it wasn't last I checked. I have it because I bought it before it was delisted from the store. I make these videos in part in the hopes that it will be made available again if enough interest is garnered around it. And just briefly, so the if you want sort of my general overview of general thoughts on all arcade and arcade style games, then I put them at the start of my review of Space Harrier 2, and that one is from the same collection, so think I might also just not talk specifically about what the emulation offers here and just focus purely on what's in this game that isn't in the others. Now, the game itself didn't really tell me about the plot, and I didn't look elsewhere. Like, there's at the very end there's a cutscene that says something, but without more context I don't even fully, like, I don't know, it seems like they're, more or less, you are fighting at least some like robots, something like that. And yeah, this is basically a top-down shooter, and yeah, like I'd say of the games that I've reviewed by now, the one it reminded me the most of was definitely Crackdown. For some reason, 2 words rather than just one. It's 1 word, Larry. And the yeah. So basically, you are given the choice between multiple. Oh, and I should say, this is only a single-player review. I understand it has 2-player. I could definitely see how that would work. Like, if I understand correctly, it's basically co-op. I can absolutely see how. I don't know if that would mean that there's the same number of enemies or if there's even more to account for. But yeah, like, you can play this just as one, yeah, so there's several characters. Actually, I guess it's almost half a dozen. I think it is 5 total. What throws me off a little bit is that some levels you don't seem to get to choose between all. I don't know. I was a tiny bit confused. Maybe it's just the order that sometimes different as you scroll through them. Anyway, I personally chose, and I believe I'm saying this with appropriate. I'm trying to be sensitive with my word choice here. The person with dwarfism. And basically he works well as a sort of all-round kind of, he's got good range and speed and such, and each of the others has at least one downside, but I would also say all of them, there's at least some situations that they are good for. And obviously, if you're playing this emulated and you can just rewind, and checkpoint and save and such, just try out all of them, see which you like, and then, rewind or go back to the checkpoint or something until you, feel comfortable with your choice. They do a pretty good job with the variety of them, One of them has this sort of grenade, and, all of them have at least one ranged attack, which, like, for this is absolutely crucial. And let's see, basically, so in this one, I don't know exactly why in Crackdown one of the two buttons is for cycling your attack rather than just both of them being for attack like it is here, but okay. But yeah, in this, and I will also say this one definitely needed for both keys. Like, there were a bunch of times in this where I am really, really happy that I was allowed to just, like, you can basically just spam both of them. You can quickly tap both essentially at the same time, and you will fire both weapons, if it's one of the ones where you can fire both quickly, such as for the person with dwarfism. And I'm sure the characters have names. My wrists are too sore to look them up right now. And yeah, it's this thing where basically when one of the characters, if it's not universal for enemies, but for your characters, one hit will kill. And if you get hit once, you will die. And basically, you can then continue the level with another character, and I do mean continue, not restart. And yeah, that is definitely an interesting thing. I did not test to see if you can ever get them back. I did notice that, like hypothetically, if most of them die in one level, if you can get them back for a later level, I did notice that there was at least one level where I just to see what would happen, I tried to let each of them die, and as several of my characters died, at one point there was at least one NPC that popped up in the level, and I suppose I wouldn't rule out that maybe if I saved that NPC, that would mean I had another character to play as in the following level. But yeah, in this, in Crackdown, you are, taking out these, in the video game, areas, and in this one, instead, you are taking out enemies and saving, like, if something attacks you, you may have to take it out, but there are also levels that will have, like, NPCs that you can rescue, and basically, if you exit the level without having taken out every enemy, you will just have to exit with every character, or if they die, that, actually, yeah, I forgot to check, but I can imagine if you've exited the level with at least one character, that means that next level you will have that character, and I figure if the rest of your characters die, you just won't have those without rescuing something like that, Personally, I just went for always taking out every enemy in this so that I didn't have to walk through a bunch of enemy fire in order, 4 additional times after, yeah. And I think that does more or less, yeah, so it's got a pretty appropriate length. Once you get the hang of it, a lot of levels can be completed very quickly, so that the fact that, there is a pretty decent number of levels for a game from back then in this, but it's also, yeah, they're so short that it doesn't get to, yeah, it's easy enough to find out by yourself how long this game is. So for those who don't want to know, I'm not going to say it in this video. So other than, A and B buttons both being for shooting, two different weapons, you move, you can move in all four directions. This is not one of those games where at least one of them doesn't really do anything. And, unlike Crackdown, you cannot hug walls. There were definitely times where I wished I could, but you can, you are still, it is still about angling your attacks. And I definitely also, noticed that in this one, in Crackdown, a number of enemies will move towards you, and that might also be part of why that one, it's good that that one really, really good that that one does have the wall hugging. In this one, there's a number of enemies who will not move, and this does mean that there are times where they're placed in a way where it's very, very difficult for you to get even one shot on them. And note that a lot of they will require you hitting them multiple times, whereas if they hit you even once, there are places where if you don't angle it 100% right, you cannot shoot an enemy without them shooting you first. And there are places where even if you get the exact right angle, you'll only be able to fire off one shot, and then you'll have to take cover, at least playing as the person with dwarfism. I can imagine, though, that's probably an area where the grenade might be better. And yeah, but yeah, basically, sometimes it's definitely like this sort of war of attrition kind of thing, and there are, yeah, it's always about finding the right angle and getting the timing right and such. It never quite becomes like bullet hell, but there are definitely times where you will face a very high number of projectiles coming your way, and there are some enemies who will move. And yeah, the enemy design is nice and varied. There are some that are more or less humanoid, but then there's also like these flying orbs, for example, and robots of varying sizes and behavioral patterns and attack types and such. At least some of the enemies can be stun locked, but that's not always gonna mean that much when there's a lot of them in one area. And yeah, the AI is quite good. There was never a time where the enemy didn't attack or move or something when that seemed to be what they would normally do. And yeah, so it is linear in the sense that you start in one specific spot, and if you don't take out every enemy, you have to get to a specific spot to finish a level, and that you can't choose the order in which you play levels. But there are a number of levels where technically, I mean, do you want to clear from the bottom to the top, from the left to the right, or, once again, not clear at all? That is essentially more or less up to you. There's just levels where you definitely want to choose one of these over the other. And part of the fun is determining which is which. The atmosphere, they managed to be effectively oppressive. It helps that there's essentially, whether you're playing one or two players, there isn't really any help within a level. You just have to take out all the enemies and or save the NPCs. And because of the sheer number of enemies, and they tend to all be visible at the same time, and you also, there's a counter on the left side of the screen. Several, really, but one of them is for the number of enemies, and one of them is for time. Now, I never ran out of time, but I can imagine that would probably mean you you lose. And this is one of those games where you can't really save along the way without emulation. I mean, you do have to complete the whole thing in one sitting. And let's see. Yeah, other than the very end, there's not really any cutscenes. And yeah, the graphics, for the time, good. They managed a nice level of detail on the various characters. Like, I tested out every single playable character, and they do all have a distinct appearance. And you can also always easily tell, like, no two enemies look the same. And I don't think there's even one reskin either. If I recall correctly, all of them are, different, which, that's not always the case. Like, I love the two Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade games from this, like 1989 and I forget, is it 91 for the second one? But Turtles in Time is the second one. I am willing to acknowledge those two, as I do in those videos. Those two definitely do use reskins for some enemy variety. And the sound design is good. Like, you feel like there is a genuine impact when something is hit, whether it's you or an enemy or an obstacle or something. And the music does a good job of keeping up the tension and such. And yeah, it is a game that is both challenging and fun. I can absolutely imagine people being addicted to this, and it does have a high score table, which of course might mean some will play it over and over to get, like, it's in part based on the amount of time it takes you. And that's of course going to mean, so even if you get all the way to the end, if you beat this entire game, there's still it might still be possible to get an even higher score than you did. And certainly the first time, you're not going to get the highest score, even if you beat the game, you might get the highest score on that device, but you're not, if nobody else has beaten it with a better, but you're not going to get the best high score that is possible at all. It's very much one of those games of, improving how well you do at it, even after being able to complete it. And that is essentially where let's see, I guess, yeah, that's one of the levels of replayability, but another is, of course, you want to try one of the other characters, like, this is a game you can play a bunch of times and still have more to discover. And I don't think I've mentioned yet, I really appreciate, when a level starts, you choose what character to play as. So, and at this point, you've seen the level and enemy placement. So it definitely is, saying, hey, who do you think makes the most sense here? Now, personally, I pretty much, what's the term? I mained the person with dwarfism. Now, I think that does... Yeah, so I don't know, maybe I've more or less already said, but yeah, I didn't run into any bugs or glitches in this. And yeah, they do a good job with the setting. Like, once again, I don't really know too much of the context here because it's not inside the game itself, but... And I don't know, maybe I'm saying that too much in this video. I'm just noting, like, for example, I think it was Space Harrier 2, like, it opens with a cutscene that gives some stuff and then ends on one that, also explains himself. So it's not like it's impossible, that's all I'm saying. Anyway, these are contemporaries. But this definitely does have this kind of, I don't know if post-apocalyptic necessarily, but dystopian, surely. And yeah, like, they do a good job. Like, areas feel kind of desolate and hostile, especially to human life. Very nicely done on that. And yeah, the level design is good. So I've already gone over some environmental storytelling. It's dry and unpleasant and such, but they also, if I recall correctly, and it's a little difficult because there's so many levels, but I don't think any two levels look the exact same. And yeah, the very start levels will be fairly bare, but gradually they might put in more like obstacles. There are mountains in your way, and some enemies at the top every day. And that is, of course, also an area where you really want to make sure. Actually, yeah, come to think of it, I think maybe one of the two attacks is for like the same um, elevation that you're on, and the other attack for each of these characters is higher elevation, or at least potentially higher elevation. And yeah, you'll want to get good at determining exactly how far away you should be from something before you use the higher elevation attack, because you might, just hit the mountain itself. If not, it does this thing of, at least for some of them, the attack will sort of arc, and if it doesn't have enough squares to arc fully, then will not go quite high enough. Meanwhile, the enemy's attacks won't necessarily have that problem. And yeah, sometimes you will have to, take out a wall in order to get to where you're going. And yeah, genuinely, very, very fun to play, and just a good test of, reflexes, quick thinking, hand-to-eye coordination, and yeah, you know, I rate this 8. Challenging but fun, taking out of enemies that are strategically placed and or move, out of 10.